Your emergency fund is your number one need. Protect that, sacrifice everything else. You'll probably be really, really grateful that you did.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to our next video. So today I get a chance to sit down with Bob Wells, and we're going to discuss important things you may want to consider before starting your nomadic journey and buying a vehicle. So we also have another video coming out that will be all the different options that you have for living in a vehicle. So whether it's a car, a van, a truck camper, we go through every single one of those and talk about the different options. But today we just want to talk to you about some of the financial considerations you want to have before starting this journey. So I hope you enjoyed today's video and get something out of it.
I want to talk to you about your budget. What I really want to talk to you about is your emergency fund. So there is a very broad range of incomes watching this video right now. Some of you just got your eviction notice. You've got no money in the bank. And there are some of you, and I know I've met a lot of you on both extreme ends. There are a lot of you who have good income. You have a large monthly income. You have a large savings. And so you both have very extremely different needs. And I don't want to just present ideas to you that is one in the middle, because neither of you will get exactly what you want. So above everything else, I want to say to you, have an emergency fund. And that's true no matter your income. Have an emergency fund. Live below your means. Even if you've got a bunch of money. If you live below your means, you can always build your savings. Brian, tell us a little bit about when you started and your finances.
So when I first hit the road, again, I bought a really cheap old motorhome, 1977. I bought it for $3,300. I put about $1,000 into it with, a little bit of solar, a couple other things. But I made sure I had about 10 grand in savings, because when I hit the road, I didn't have a job and I had no clue what I was doing, but I figured that 10 grand could last me a little while. And if I broke down, it would help me out in those situations. So what was important to me was having that emergency fund and being able to not worry about putting food on my table, shelter over my head. So that 10 grand to me was very important.
Right. And I was just the opposite. So we really have kind of helpful stories. I was working. I was going to continue to work. I'd just been through a divorce. I wasn't going anywhere because my kids lived there. Where my kids lived, I lived. And so I continued to work. I had a good steady income every month. But I was broke by the time divorces are devastating financially. Don't do one if you can avoid it. And I was broke. I had $1,500 to my name, and I found a $1,500 used box van that looked like crap, but ran quite good. And so I bought it. But I went to work every day, and I had a good steady income coming in, and I had some credit cards if I needed to get through an emergency. And so that's a different story. Now, a third story is you have no money and no job, and then no income or a fixed income. You're on Social Security, little pension, disability, whatever. So $500, $800, $1,000 a month, and no savings. And that's going to be a fairly large amount of my audience. The choice of vehicle becomes very, very important. Well, you were concerned about it was an older RV.
Absolutely.
It was going to have repairs.
Yes. Yeah, that kind of comes with the territory. When I bought it, I was assuming I would probably have to replace the engine, which I eventually did. It was after 2 years, but that is just something you have to keep in consideration, is that transmission, engine, those things on an old RV, a lot of wear and tear, they're going to go bad eventually.
Right. And while I was broke right then, I was making money every month, and I was going to be able to save money and build up a savings and an emergency fund. And in the meantime, I had credit cards if I had to get me through. Let's assume that you don't have any money and you have a very low income. I think that's a lot of you. Then you have to live well below your means until you can build up your income. So let me give you some examples. I've had people write me and say, I'm going to be forced into the road. I have $7,000 in savings now. Car is reliable, but I don't want to live in my car. And I found an old RV for $4,000. Well, my answer is always don't buy that, because that old RV is you'll still have $3,000 left, but you're going to need a lot more than that. And so don't buy that RV. And the next thing, finances are critically important. don't go over the money you have. And the next thing I want to talk about is wants versus needs. So the more you want more comfort, we all do. We want to have an apartment on wheels and live in a great home. But most of that is a want. It's not a need. Your emergency fund is your number one need. Protect that, sacrifice everything else, but keep that emergency fund. You're going to be one day you'll probably be really, really grateful that you did. So what are our needs? What are actual needs? You need shelter. There's in the world of survival and preparation, there the threes, the rule of threes. You can live 3 minutes without air. Well, that's not going to be a problem. There's plenty of air to go around. You can live 3 hours in severe bad weather, either cold or heat. You're going to die within about 3 hours. If you jump in the creek, it's 50 degrees outside, and you get out and you can't get warm, can't change your clothes, you're on death's door, and you've got maybe 3 hours. Same with heat. If it's extremely hot, the heat will kill you. So shelter, getting away from the weather, you've got to do that in about 3 hours. It's critically important. And then water is 3 days, and food is about 30 days plus. Depends on a lot of factors, but you can go 30 days, most of us, without food. And so those are needs. You've got to have those or you die. So you got to have shelter, but a shower or a toilet, those are wants. You can live without them. Humans have been living without showers and toilets for millions of years, and you can too. So treat that emergency fund and shelter as your highest priority. You'll sacrifice anything to get it.
The needs are super important. Like you want food, you want shelter, you need a little bit of gas to go place to place in that emergency fund. And again, the wants, we can go without a lot of things. And so really just making that decision for yourselves, what are your needs, what are your wants? I usually make columns and say, is this a want or is this a need? And if you can live without it, do it, because you just want to keep on saving until you get that nest egg.
Right. So now hopefully you've decided this is the amount of money you have, and you're going to hoard that emergency fund like your life depends on it, because it might. And you're going to evaluate like Brian said, with a list, wants, needs, and you're going to be really, really honest. I can do without this, and my emergency fund is a priority, so I will do without this. That could be a shower, it could be a toilet and running water and all that. You can live without those things. So the next thing I think we want to cover is the idea of comfort versus freedom, because the choice of your vehicle is a teeter-totter. The more freedom you get, the less comfort you get, and the more comfort you get, the more less freedom you get. So for example, I was broke, I didn't have any cash, so I chose freedom from going into debt by buying a beat-up old used van, and I didn't have running water, I didn't have a toilet, I didn't have a shower, I had nothing. So that was my only choice. I gave up all that comfort for the freedom to build up my savings. To me, that was freedom. And you did something fairly different because you're in a different situation.
Correct, yeah. So comfort was more of my desire at that point. I wanted running water, I wanted a full kitchen, and granted, it's still a small motorhome, but I wanted those creature comforts because I hadn't lived on the road before. I was doing this as an adventure. And so now the cool thing about that is that I have all of the conveniences that you would need, refrigeration, things, it's all built in with the motorhome. The downside is I can't get very far in the backcountry. And when you talk about going around town, things like that, you're just not maneuverable. The drivability is way lower. I only get 6 miles per gallon. So it's something to consider. You're paying a lot more for those comforts and you have a ton less freedom.
Absolutely. So it's a matter of priorities. And you need to have this concept that you're going to choose a priority to you, and you have to learn to live with it for a very long time. And you found a really good intermediate choice in have a Toad.
Correct, yeah, and I highly recommend having a Toad if you have a motorhome, just because the motorhome, you can't get into small spaces, you can't go into town, and again, getting 6 miles per gallon, it makes it very inconvenient. I'm not going to run to the store and get a loaf of bread or whatnot. With the tracker, I'm getting 30 miles per gallon, and so I can then set up my motorhome, from that point, I zip around town, I go explore. So I'm very deliberate with my travels. I go someplace and I sit. I sit for those 2 weeks, and then I move very short distance. I sit another 2 weeks. And so I am always doing that. Very little miles on the motorhome, a lot of miles on the tracker.
Right, and you could actually do it on a very low budget. Your first vehicle was the, what was it?
It was a Ford Festiva.
Ford Festiva, and that was pretty cheap.
It was. I bought it for $1,000.
$1,000.
And that thing got 40 miles per gallon. It was awesome. I did get to a point where I wanted to get further into the backcountry, which it just wasn't capable, too low of clearance. The tracker gave me that freedom. So I have a taste of the freedom, but it's at a cost. I'm now maintaining 2 engines, 2 insurance policies, all that. So there is a downside to that.
Right. The costs go up.
Correct.
So there are options, but the key thing I want you to do is to know what's so important to you, your highest priority, that you won't sacrifice for it. So you getting into the backcountry, being able to drive far and fast whenever you want on a low budget, then that determines your choices when we start looking at individual vehicles. So we made different choices. When we looked at our priorities, they were just different. And so you have to, none of us can tell you what your best vehicle is. Once you've decided what your priority is, then you can, freedom versus comfort and budget, then you can make a really good choice, hopefully the first time.
And I'll add that there is no one perfect scenario or setup. They all have their drawbacks and they all have their positives. So there's no one perfect example of a vehicle for a nomadic home, but you can do whatever's important to you and make those choices.
Right. You want to make yourself as happy as you can for as long as you can by sticking to your priorities and values.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed today's video when Bob and I had a chance to sit down and talk about all the important things you want to consider before hitting the road and starting your nomadic journey. So we talked about emergency funds, wants versus needs, and just comfort versus freedom. So hopefully you guys got something out of it. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share with friends, and until next time, we'll see you down the road. So long.
So what are we looking at next then, Brian?
Sorry, I just burped in the middle of that.
Okay, we don't cut those out.
No, perfect.